what's happening in Russia on the economy side of things, and things are looking good from everything that I'm reading. I'm also reading that, I read Putin's statement at the virtual meeting with the other SCO members, and
Yeah,
he actually said that they're doing a lot of business and a lot of trade with the Chinese yuan,
that's
which
right.
is also interesting. I think he said something like 80% of the trade that's occurring now between Russia and China is taking place in yuan. So it looks like Russia has successfully completely pivoted away from the collective West financial system, and they're reaping the rewards of that successful pivot. And other
Absolutely.
countries are interested and trying to follow suit.
Putin had a meeting with his Prime Minister, Prime Minister Mishustin, and they were talking about what the overall situation is in the economy. And if you remember, at the end of last year, the IMF said that Russia would probably achieve 0.7% growth this year, which is already a surprise to most people. In the first 5 months, it achieved 0.6% growth. In May, it was 5.4% year-on-year growth. And we hear that growth has been strong also in June and is likely to continue to be in July. And the PMI figures are really very strong. In services, they're almost 60%. In manufacturing, it's around 52.5%, slightly fell back. But that's because of problems in the oil industry, which we'll come to in a moment. So overall, very strong growth in the economy, rising living standards, a good harvest. In other words, large amounts of food grown, and very, very subdued inflation. Inflation fell to around 2% in June. It's slightly gone up, but as I said, this is largely a statistical quirk because the inflation figures are distorted by the events of last year. And overall, the situation seems very stable and the economy is growing very rapidly. Now, whenever I find myself talking about the Russian economy, I always get people coming along and tell me, but look at the ruble. The ruble has fallen in value, and this suggests that there's all kinds of problems. Once upon a time, that would have been true if we were talking about 2008, for example, or 1998, even more. A fall in the value of the ruble would have been catastrophic because, of course, Russia was importing goods. Factories were relying heavily on imported Western components, and the entire financial system in Russia was integrated, very heavily integrated with the West. And trying to maintain the ruble at a stable level was really important. And of course, in 1998, when the ruble devalued, the entire financial system crashed. The country teetered into bankruptcy. It had to default on its loans. And that created a major, though actually rather short, crisis in the economy. And in 2008, it was almost the same. Well, it is completely different now because Russia doesn't trade in dollars or euros any longer. It doesn't import goods in any great volumes any longer from the West. Russian factories do not operate on the basis of Western components, and Russian tourists do not travel abroad. So we're not talking about it, and of course the financial system is completely separated from the West. So fall in the value of the ruble, which is entirely related, can I just say this quickly, to the decline in oil prices that has happened this year. And I'll come to that in a moment because that's an interesting story in itself. The fall in the value of the ruble is not affecting the domestic economy. We're not seeing any big increases in inflation. We're not seeing any pressures, any stresses within the financial system. On the contrary, the economy continues, as I said, to grow. And Mishustin talked about, he said that he now predicts that growth in the economy, GDP growth this year, is now definitely going to be well over 2%. The reason why oil prices are falling and have been continuing to fall, despite repeated production cuts by OPEC Plus, production cuts which the Russians are only now, by the way, starting to implement. The reason oil prices have been falling, it's now becoming clear, is because Europe in particular, but probably the United States as well, are heading into a very big industrial recession. So that is dampening down oil prices. And because Europe and the United States are heading towards an industrial recession, demand for Chinese goods is lower than it might otherwise have been. And that has meant that China also has been running into problems. Industrial recovery in China has been much weaker than expected. And all of this has had a cumulative effect on the price of oil. Because this is the first year I can remember since the Soviet collapse when the Russian economy appears to be registering strong growth despite a global decline in oil prices. So that is something unexpected and new, and it is a product of the very considerable industrial reorganization that has taken place over the last year. But it is also, I have to say this, a product of the very, very hard work that Putin and his team have been doing for the 10 or 15 years before that they've managed to create a situation where the Russian economy is no longer as interconnected with the oil price as it used to be.